Okay, well, hopefully you enjoyed those videos and you can see what the point was and why I put them where I did. This fear that elevated self-esteem might be harmful was a very pronounced one, and I think is something that you should be aware of. I think a lot of people today would refer to some of the things that you saw in that video as like evidence of narcissism. Remember that narcissism is a disorder, and you have to have a certain set of the symptoms in order to qualify for the diagnosis. Whereas a person who has an inappropriately high self esteem, that's not necessarily a disorder, right? And so it's really important to sort of like keep these things separate in your minds. There's disordered level behavior, and then there's sort of like, okay, I'm not disordered. I don't have a personality disorder, which is what narcissism is, but maybe I have this way of regarding the world and myself within it that is inappropriate. All right, we're going to take a little test, and this is the rating scale that you're going to use to answer. So if you want to grab a piece of paper and a pencil and play along, it's always more fun if you actually play along. So I hope you'll do it. So 5 means average. So if you use 5, it means that you think you're average. Anything below 5 means you're below average. Anything above 5 means you're above average. So, and then I put titles across the top to maybe help you drill down how much below or how much above so that you can pick a number that represents you. All right, so I'm going to go through these 15 items pretty quick because I know you can pause, so I'm just going to go through them. So, what you're going to do, your task as you hear each of these prompts, is to visualize a group of people who you don't know, just nameless, faceless people who are your same age and your same sex. So just a group of people of your same age and sex, right? So that's your comparison group. So, for example, for number 1, I want you to rate your leadership ability relative to the average person of your same age and sex. Okay, so that's your task on each of these. So, rate yourself for leadership ability, rate your athletic ability compared to other people of your same age and sex, your ability to get along with others, your tolerance. This is a good time for me to mention these questions are eye of the beholder questions. So, whatever you mean by tolerance is what you're doing. Number 5 is energy level. Number 6 is helpfulness. Number 7 is responsibility. Number 8 is creativeness, if that's a word. 9 is patience. 10 is trustworthiness. 11 is sincerity. 12 is thoughtfulness. 13 is cooperativeness, if that's a word. 14 is reasonableness. And 15 is intelligence. So if you need to, you can pause me and you can rate all 15 of these items. All right, I'm going to assume that if you stop me, you started me again. All right, so what you're going to do next is get your average score. So there are a couple of ways you can do this. If you want to do some math, you can just add up the ratings that you gave for all 15 items and then divide it by 15, and that'll give you your average score. If you don't feel like doing math, the other way that you can do it is count up how many times you answered above 5. So anything that's above 5. So if you gave yourself like 6 or above, count that up in one pool. If you gave yourself 4 or below, count that up in a different pool, and then count up all the 5s and call that a different pool. So if you don't feel like doing math, you can just do some counting. All right, well, hopefully you have some degree of scoring ability at this point. So, what I normally do in class is I ask everybody to raise their hands and ask, so either depending on how you did this. If you did the math, I ask if you have a number that is greater than 5. And that technically would be anything that's a score of 5.5 or above. So if you're average, if you did the math and your average is 5.5 or above, I would have you raising your hand. If you didn't want to do the math and you just counted the times that you gave a 6, 7, or 8, and if that number is greater than the sum of the total of how many times you gave 5 and the number of times that you gave 1, 2, 3, or 4, If the number for above average is greater than the number for average or below average, then I would ask you to put your hands up. So it's kind of just a judgment. When we're in class, I can kind of help people to when you have questions. And so if you have a question, I'm sorry if it's confusing. But if you have something that implies that your total score, your average score is greater than average, it's in the above average category, you would be very typical. Generally, by the time we've gotten done doing it in class and I finally have everybody knowing what I mean by raise your hand if you're above average, I generally have every hand in the class up. Most people have a score that is above average, or they have counted that they have more above average ratings. All of us have some category that we would consider ourselves below average, and some categories where we said, well, I'm pretty average. But most of us are above average by the time we get done with this. The thing is, we can't all be above average, can we? We can't. I mean, average means that most people should be clustering around five, and there should be relatively few people getting nines and ones, right? Like that should rarely happen. But when we rate ourselves compared to just sort of like this faceless group of people where the only thing we know about them is their age and their sex, we tend to assume that we fare pretty well. That compared to faceless people. Now, I tried to make sure that that was really clear that that's who you were comparing to, because if you think about your own friends, you might be more realistic in your ratings. If you think of people from your own like high school class, something like that, you might be more realistic in your judgment. You tend to boost yourself when comparing to people that aren't really defined. And that's the important thing is that when we sort of think about it and we think about, well, the average American of my same age or sex or whatever, we benefit from the comparison, and that helps to keep our self-esteem better. It doesn't make us narcissistic. It doesn't make us selfish. It doesn't make us into the dark side of self-esteem. It makes us have a healthy level of self-esteem that keeps us striving and keeps us going. So it's actually a good thing. So it's one of the ways that we maintain higher self-esteem. It's what we call the self-serving bias. The reason why in a nameless, faceless group of people who are our same age and sex, we tend to fare better is that we tend to give ourselves credit for things that we just sort of assume they don't do. We are biased towards interpreting our own behavior through a lens that benefits us. And it's good. It's a good thing that we do it on nearly any dimension that is subjective and socially desirable, which all the things on that little scale I gave you fit those descriptions. Most people see themselves as better than average. We like to present a good image to external audience. We want other people to think that we think well of ourselves. We want, like I said, the people who were in prison for violent offenses, maybe they wanted the researchers to think that they think well of themselves, even if they don't. Right? We want other people, the external audience, to think we think well of ourselves. So that's an important aspect. We do tend to get more modest when the claims can be verified, though. Like if it were something objective, so not something subjective, like I mentioned that little teal square, but something objective. Let's say I asked you, what's your GPA? I'm going to check it with the registrar. You probably would be more accurate, right? Do you think your sense of humor is, better or worse than the average person? We're going to have a little last comic standing competition here, so you're going to have to back up your claim. People will be more modest when their claims can be verified. But I think more importantly is that we need to try and maintain a good sense of self-esteem for ourselves, that we're doing it for our own consumption more than for anyone else. Like you knew I wasn't going to see your score on that scale, so there was no reason for you to boost your ratings of yourself for any other reason except for yourself. So when we are judging our own behaviors compared to a faceless group, we know that we meant to do it well. We know we meant to be nice. We know that we meant to succeed. And so we go ahead and say, A, we succeeded in ways that maybe we really didn't. I think a lot of times we take credit for stuff that wasn't actually a success. And we say, yes, I am better at that. And And also, when we do succeed, we're more likely to say it's because of my effort, or it's because of my skill, or it's because of me that I succeeded. And so that helps us to feed into our self esteem that we are good at the thing. When we fail, it's a little surprising to us because we meant to succeed. And so we're more likely to blame outside sources. Say things like luck, or the time limit, or the teacher didn't set it up right, or whatever. Right. So we are more likely when we have a failure to blame it on something external, so it doesn't become part of our sense of self. That was temporary. It was outside of my control. That's not something that has anything to do with me and my competence. That has to do with the circumstances. Another way that we maintain high self esteem is by a process that we call self handicapping. Here we have a person who apparently is supposed to be running a marathon, even has her number stuck to her chest, and is currently eating potato chips and soda while sitting on the couch with the cat. So, I mean, like the race must be today, and this is how she's chosen to fuel herself, and maybe prepare. One of the things that we do when we're confronted with something difficult where there's a chance of failure is we take steps that will help to protect our self image by creating a ready made excuse. So if she fails in this race, she can point to the fact that she didn't fuel herself correctly. Right? I did all the training, I was ready to go, but on the morning of the race, I just, I didn't fuel myself correctly. I would hope she wouldn't really eat this stuff and then try and blame it on the fueling. But, right, if we give ourselves a ready-made excuse, then the failure is less, self-identifying. It's not about me as an entity, it's more about the circumstances. So that gives us more of an opportunity to externalize failure, right? So I can point to something outside of myself and not have to take the credit for my failure. If I succeed anyway, let's say that in her category, she's the one who finishes with the fastest time. She can say, wow, even with this terrible fueling, I still managed to come in fastest for my group. I am a great runner. My preparation really was better than other people. It could even withstand my terrible fueling on the day of the race. Wow. And other people will give her extra credit for having succeeded even in the face of this, deficit. Research results have shown that like collegiate athletes will avoid practice leading up to ego threatening competitions, like maybe maybe when we're talking about college athletes who are in individual sports like a race or something like that. They may, oh, I don't feel very well on the the day before the race, and that way they can kind of point to that lack of practice as the reason why they don't succeed. Even players on team sports, if they're facing like a big rival, they may say, well, I missed practice because I had a big test, or they may have some kind of ready made excuse for missing practice so that then they'd have the ready made excuse for failure. Shy individuals admit their shyness when they know that their performance is going to be evaluated. In fact, there's a special term for this kind of self handicapping. It's called sandbagging. And sandbagging occurs when we say we're basically trying to manage other people's expectations. So the shy person says, well, I am really shy. I'm going to do what you asked me anyway. I'm going to do my performance, but I am really shy. So keep that in mind as you're judging me. That's a way to manage other people's expectations. So maybe if you're a musician and you go up there and you go, well, I haven't practiced much, or, oh, I don't know, I've been experiencing some tightness in my fingers lately. Or when you say those kinds of things right before you're about to be evaluated, it might be that you are actually doing a special kind of self handicapping called sandbagging. Oh, don't expect much from me. People who display self handicapping tend to also show lower self esteem, at least in the area that they're being assessed, and poorer psychological adjustment. They may be more nervous, they may be a more anxious person, and so they may be having difficulty with those issues, and they're just really worried. They might even have like tendencies towards a little bit of depression, that where if I were to fail, this might be like the straw that broke the camel's back kind of situation. And so they're afraid that if they were to fail, that they wouldn't be able to come back from that. All right. So, one of the things I like to do in my intro psych class to find out the degree to which people display the self serving bias is I give them this little test. And on the instructions say, to get some meaningful feedback about student reactions to course testing procedures. I usually do this like the day after the midterm. I'd appreciate your candid responses to the following questions. In each case, circle the number that best corresponds to your opinion. And then I ask them, to what extent do you think your score on this test was due to? And they get to use this Likert scale. I just truncated it down for you guys. And so their question is this particular test, how easy or difficult it was, my academic ability or lack of ability. So they are rating whether it was due to their own abilities, study, how much or how little they studied, and then luck, good or bad. And so they're supposed to rate those four things. I also asked them to tell me like what grade they got on the test and stuff like that, so I can do a little analysis of those who performed well versus those who didn't and stuff like that. What we find from this little demonstration every time is that people tend to accept responsibility for their successes and they tend to deny responsibility for their failures. So when I separate it out into the A and B scorers and the C and D scorers, what I find is that the A and B scorers attribute those grades to different reasons than the C and D scorers do. So we have our options that they had available over here on the right, and I'm going to lump them into internal and external attributions. So number two gets into a stable internal attribution, skill, ability, talent. People who do well on the test are more likely to make that attribution than people who do poorly on the test. An unstable internal attribution would be something like effort, interest, the things that are measured by number three. People who do poorly on the test tend to emphasize unstable. Yes, it was my fault that I didn't study enough, but had I studied, I know I would have done better. External attributions, a stable attribution is measured by number one, whether the test was easy or difficult. And you could have gotten a high score and said it was largely due to the test being easy. You could have gotten a low score and said it was largely due to the test being difficult. It would be the same number, right? But what we find is that the people who do poorly tend to attribute it to this stable external factor of how the test was constructed, and people who do well tend to give a more moderate rating on that. They're like, no, it's not about the test. It was about my internal skill and talent, right? Um, the unstable external attribution of luck or fate, again, this is something that people who do well on the test usually don't point to this. People who do poorly on the test, they're like, well, I was unlucky that you asked questions that I wasn't prepared for, or something like that. So they tend to make these unstable external. So external attributions are more common among people who do poorly. Unstable internal are more common among people who do poorly. And so you can kind of see this like self-esteem maintenance. It's not my fault. It was something external. It maybe was my fault, but it's something that if I would have just applied myself, I wouldn't have had this outcome. And so it's something that I could change really easily. So when people have a threat to their self esteem, they try and make external attributions or an unstable internal attribution. All right, I'm going to hold on. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up with a little humility. Because we've been talking about self-respect, we've been talking about self-esteem, maybe a little bit of dark side of self-esteem. So it's great to use the self-serving bias to maintain your self-esteem. That's awesome. We need to be doing that, but we don't want to be going into the dark side, right? So don't take yourself too seriously. Admit your own biases and seek accurate feedback. Experience awe and gratitude. Recognize that you are smaller than nature. Recognize that you are smaller than an orchestral performance, whatever. Show gratitude when good things happen to you. Seek and provide security in relationships, right? Be a secure base for other people. Try to find people who will provide security to you. Live authentically. Be honest. Be yourself. Be your ideal self, not your idealized self. Stop striving for an idealized self, especially if you got it from like Instagram. Those people are not really like that. Be your real self. All right, here's our positivity exercise for this week. For 1 week, take 10 minutes every day. Everybody has 10 minutes. Try and remember to do this. Write down three funny things you heard, saw, did, or experienced. I just made fun of Instagram. I get a lot of funny stuff off of Instagram. But so something that tickled your funny bone. Think about the things that you found really funny and describe how they made you feel. Like, why were they funny? What was it that hit you? And then, write both of those kinds of things down for all three of the things that you did. I think what you'll find is it helps to boost the positivity of the experience of humor, and it'll give you some perspective into what kinds of things really can work for you to boost you in a positive mood. All right, I hope you'll do that exercise. It's a really fun and positive one, and I will see you in the next chapter.